And this is the Mike Gormley Show. We're talking to author Cary Baker. Does author sound a little weird to you at this point?
It actually does sound weird to me. I kind of can't believe it. It was
Yeah.
always my aspiration to do that after PR, and I was only going to do PR for 2, 3 years, and it turned into 42. So go figure. But now finally, that's what I'm doing.
Has this idea about buskers and a book on it, has that just been in your head all these years and finally now you've got the time to get into it?
Well, I'll tell you exactly how the book came about. So I moved from Los Angeles, my home of 40 years, to the nearby deserts, Palm Springs, Joshua Tree, Yucca Valley, Palm Desert, Indio, that area. Most people know it from Coachella or from visiting in the winter, and we moved there. And I discovered that the desert, California desert, was a rich home for music. Palm Springs had the Rat Pack, had Sinatra, Presley, Dean Martin, Johnny Mercer, Trini Lopez, Sonny Bono was mayor, of course. It had a grunge scene. It had a Caius, Queens of the Stone Age. Then you had Joshua Tree, where, of course, you had Graham Parsons and the Flying Burrito Brothers and that whole mythological episode of rock and roll. Later on, people like Dick Dale lived there, and nowadays Victoria Williams and Louise Goffin lived there. So I suggested to a publisher that I'd worked with while doing PR. I did some music book PR. I suggested a book about the California desert. And I did a little bit of poking around and found that a very definitive book had been written about Joshua Tree music called Joshua Tree Voice. And I sort of got a little depressed about that. I bought the book. It was excellent. It really kind of nailed it. And then I met a guy who covered the music beat for the Desert Sun newspaper for 40 years. And, he had told me, well, that'll be interesting, your book. I have interviews with Sinatra, Presley, Dean Martin, and the whole list. And I suddenly thought, well, maybe I'm not the one to write a book about the California desert. It was kind of a niche subject anyway. I started poking around. I started calling managers of legacy artists, many of whom were blues artists. And I happened to talk to a friend of mine from college, as a matter of fact, who was looking after the estate of Ted Hawkins, who I mentioned earlier. Ted Hawkins being the Venice Boardwalk singer who sounded like Otis Redding, and he'd been institutionalized. He'd been imprisoned. He'd
Ed
had
Hawkins, by the way, on the way back in from the commercial, we heard on the boardwalk from Ted Hawkins from Venice Beach tapes.
right. So and it turns out that he left a lot of notes behind. He has since passed on, but he left a lot of notes, his manager told me. So I called my publisher and said, how about a book about Ted Hawkins? Publisher at the time, a different one than I ended up using for this book, but very, very good and supportive to me. Said, well, who's Ted Hawkins? And I said, well, Ted Hawkins is a busker, a street singer. There was a pause. There was a pause. There was a pause. And suddenly the guy from the publisher said, what about a book about buskers, plural, street singers, plural? I'm like, Eureka, that's
Hmm.
it. That was my revelatory moment. I thought, I can do that. And I thought about Arvella Gray on Maxwell Street. I thought about Venice Boardwalk and Ted Hawkins. I thought about my trips to New Orleans, where I'd seen numerous ensembles, from Dixieland bands to folk singers, to blues singers in New Orleans. I thought about my trips to South by Southwest and seeing people on 6th Street and the Guadalupe Street drag. And I thought about walking through New York, just getting from point A to point B, but maybe strolling through Washington Square and seeing folk singers. And I thought, there's a book to be had on that. And I did a little bit of poking around after that desert book and found that, yeah, there was a book written about busking in 1981. And it's a very fine book about the origins of busking. My story starts about 1920 and goes to about 2020. It starts with Blind Lemon Jefferson and some of the old blues singers, Reverend Gary Davis, a guy named Bongo Joe who played on oil drums in San Antonio. I get into doo-wop. Certainly nothing I saw on the street corners. I was too young or too sheltered, too suburban to see even the Chicago street corner doo-wop groups. But thanks to a couple of historians, including Billy Vera in Los Angeles, who grew up in New York, and a Chicago R&B historian, Robert Pruder. I felt like I was there. I even spoke to Mike Stoller of the famous Lieber and Stoller songwriting duo, and he told me that he hadn't really seen doo-wop groups out on the street corners, but he sure heard a lot of them playing the men's room at the Brill Building. And I thought, well, I can include a men's room in my definition of busking: streets, beaches, parks, schoolyards, and men's rooms. Why not? So anywhere except stages and studios is how I defined it. And the more I started poking around, I found that there was a whole organization devoted to busking advocacy in New Orleans, and an attorney who was very passionate about defending the rights of buskers, and helped change city ordinances to where buskers can play under reasonable conditions. And I did a lot of study of busking ordinances in various cities: New York, L.A., New Orleans, I believe Austin. It's pretty much legal now, and I think people see busking as something that livens up the downtown section. It's not contraband. It's something that will actually attract people to go outside. And in this day and age of being able to buy anything you want on Amazon with the click of a mouse, going downtown is still an experience. And I think street music, street art, street performance all enhance it. And a lot of buskers told me that they'd been arrested, or they'd been asked to stop or turn down the ramps. But one of them, a singer-songwriter from Boise named Elin Jewell, who herself played on Venice Boardwalk, told me, use the term wild spaces. The cities need wild spaces. And New Orleans has one. It's Jackson Square and Royal Street. LA has Venice Boardwalk. Chicago really doesn't have anything these days. It has a modern day Maxwell Street. But it ain't the same as it was in the 40s and 50s, or even the 70s. New York still has its parks, and of course London has its tube, and you see them out in France. So I didn't get too far afield. I kind of kept it to North America, including Canada. I interviewed certain people who had played in the London Tube, including some Americans like Mojo Nixon, late great Mojo Nixon, and talked to one jazz singer from New York, Madeleine Peyrou, who was kind of raised by hippie mother, who took her to France for the Cannes Festival, and she discovered busking just by doing that, and ran into a crony of Bob Dylan, who was out there busking in Paris, France, and kind of took this young girl under wing, and she learned to perform by playing in front of Parisian cafes. So I heard all kinds of great stories as I began to delve into talking to people about busking.
We're going to step away again for a minute. We're going to step out with Tuba Skinny doing Going Back Home. And when we come back, we'll catch up on some of the more points of the book. But anyway, this is the Mike Gormley Show. We're talking to Cary Baker, who's author of the book Down on the Corner: Adventures in Busking and Street Music. We'll be back in a minute. Thank you.